Good evening. Once again, I welcome you back to this end-of-day reflection. This little time to just sit back, breathe deeply, be aware of God's very real presence with you in this day, and maybe in this moment that we share together online. I was talking the last time we came together about who is God? What is God like? How would you describe God? And I talked about justice. God, our justice, being the third quality that I had. Now, in the second place, a second quality is God as compassion. That also might be viewed as God as mercy. You know, there's a funny little line in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Gospel of Luke. They're almost identical. They're both part of what we know as the Sermon on the Mount, as St. Matthew's Gospel tells it, and as St. Luke's Gospel tells it. And the last part of it is about loving our enemies, that very challenging part of the teaching of Jesus. And as he gets to the end, in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, and it's translated in English, "You should be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Now, when you go to St. Luke's Gospel, in the sixth chapter, there is that same laying out of the Sermon on the Mount, and there's that same challenging teaching to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, love our enemies, in fact. And in that one, in St. Luke's Gospel, it ends with not be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. It ends with be merciful as your heavenly Father is merciful. In other words, be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate. For that reason, I find in the second place my quality of God. What is God like? God is compassionate and God is merciful. God knows me. God knows everything about me. God sees every moment of my life, has every insight about me. God knows things about myself, my truest self, that I don't even recognize or acknowledge myself. Whenever I go to God to pray, I don't have to explain the circumstances that I'm finding myself in, the things that are challenging me or baffling me. Sometimes it's just easier to hold it before God. Why? Because our God knows us and loves us deeply. And whenever we go to prayer, what a great thing to be aware of ahead of time, and to trust in God's compassion and God's mercy, to be able to acknowledge God. They say that the 15th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel, which is basically the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son, has been called the gospel within a gospel. It has everything in that 15th chapter in those three beautiful parables, and each one of them, what's the center point? It's about God's love and mercy. Sometimes I think God's love and mercy and compassion is the hardest part of God to understand, because nobody else loves us and knows us like that. So thoroughly and deeply, no matter what we've done. I mean, sometimes you can stretch your consciousness and say that God has loved everyone on the face of the earth, everyone who's ever lived. And we all give examples of some of the people that we acknowledge as evil in the human history. Did God really love them? Well, at least what we read in the scriptures and what Jesus reveals, yes. Yes, somehow. So my second quality of God, my second virtue about who God is that God is compassionate, which is to say God is merciful. Do you share that belief too? I sure hope you do. And tonight, rest easy in the loving, compassionate embrace of God. Good evening.